Have you ever imagined arriving in a city that doesn't even appear on the maps? A place shrouded in fog, where every glance seems to hide a secret? Evelyn Clarke received a mysterious letter with no sender that brought her to Whitmore, a forgotten village in northern Scotland. But what she didn't know is that, as soon as she set foot there, she was already being watched, and that the truth she sought could cost much more than her own life. Get ready, because this story will keep you hooked until the very last second. Get ready for a deeply moving tale created for women who believe in inner strength. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this again. The storm hit the coast of Whitmore, a small town in northern Scotland, just as Evelyn Clarke arrived by train. She wasn't here for the scenery. She carried a letter that simply read, "The answers you seek lie in Whitmore. Do not trust anyone." No signature, no sender. Her pulse quickened. The rain lashed against the station windows, and every stranger's glance felt heavier than it should. She didn't know who had summoned her, or why, but she knew one thing. Leaving without discovering the truth was no longer an option. Whitmore wasn't on any map Evelyn had checked. The town felt hidden, cloaked in fog and superstition. Old stone houses leaned toward each other, as if whispering secrets she wasn't meant to hear. The innkeeper, a frail man with hollow eyes, handed her a brass key without asking for her name. "Room 6. Lock your door tonight," he muttered before walking away. Evelyn's grip tightened on the letter in her pocket. Already she could feel eyes on her, unseen but relentless. Something or someone knew she had arrived. That night, as Evelyn tried to sleep, a scratching sound echoed through the wooden walls. She froze. The noise wasn't from the wind, it was deliberate. A thin slip of paper slid under her door. Her chest tightened as she bent down to pick it up. The note bore the same handwriting as the letter she carried. "If you wish to survive, meet me at the old lighthouse before dawn. Come alone." Evelyn's heart pounded. She didn't know this town, didn't know who to trust. But staying in that room suddenly felt far more dangerous than leaving. The wind battered the bedroom windows as Evelyn put on her coat and headed toward the lighthouse. The streets of Whitmore were deserted, only the dim light of a few streetlights illuminating the fog. Each footstep echoed as if being watched. The sea roared in the distance. The lighthouse, a shadowy silhouette against the stormy sky, seemed to beckon her. But as she approached, Evelyn noticed something strange. The door was ajar, creaking in the wind as if someone had just entered. The interior of the lighthouse was damp and cold, permeated by the smell of salt and rust. Evelyn's flashlight illuminated spiral steps that climbed to the top. Mud marks on the ground indicated fresh footprints. Suddenly, a voice whispered in the darkness, "You shouldn't have come." Evelyn swung the flashlight around quickly, but no one was there. Her heart pounded in despair, but curiosity overcame her fear. She climbed the steps, each one heavier than the last. At the top, she found a table covered in damp papers, torn maps, and old photographs of the city. In all of them, the residents seemed to stare intently at the camera, as if they knew something. One photograph caught her eye. It was of herself, getting off the train that afternoon. Evelyn dropped the photo with trembling hands. Someone had known not only that she was coming, but also every movement she had made since arriving. A shadow moved behind her. "Don't make a sound." The voice was masculine, deep, and hurried. A man in a dark hood held a leather briefcase. His eyes, though partially hidden, betrayed urgency. "You got the letter, didn't you? Then you're already involved." Evelyn backed away hesitantly. "Who are you? Why did you call me here?" He didn't answer immediately, just opened the briefcase. Inside were newspaper clippings about mysterious disappearances in Whitmore, dating back decades. "They're coming back," he said. "And you're the key." Before Evelyn could ask more, A metallic sound echoed from downstairs. Heavy footsteps climbed the stairs. The man quickly closed the briefcase and shoved it against her chest. "Go! Run!" Evelyn hurried down the stairs, but the lighthouse seemed narrower and more claustrophobic with each flight. Shadows crept up behind her, accompanied by heavy breathing. She reached the door and ran out into the storm without looking back. Fog engulfed Evelyn as soon as she left the lighthouse. Her feet sank into the wet sand as she struggled to maintain her balance against the wind. In the distance, a bell rang, repeatedly, somberly. Following the sound, he arrived at an old, semi-abandoned chapel. Flickering candles illuminated broken stained glass windows. Inside, he found symbols scratched into the walls, all identical. A circle with 3 crossed lines. The same symbol appeared on some clippings inside the folder. This was no coincidence. Evelyn opened one of the clippings and read, "Residents mysteriously disappear after reporting hearing the chapel bell during storms." The date was 1973. Another clipping showed the faces of young people, all under the caption, "Never found." Her stomach churned. The symbol on the newspaper matched the one on the walls exactly. Then she noticed something else. In the shadows of the chapel, someone was watching. The figure didn't move, just breathed, audibly and rhythmically, as if waiting for her. The figure inside the chapel stepped forward, revealing itself in the dim candlelight. It was an elderly woman with long gray hair and piercing eyes. "You shouldn't have come, Evelyn Clarke," she said hoarsely. Evelyn shivered. "How do you know my name?" The old woman smiled unsettlingly. "Whitmore knows everyone who enters, and few who leave." Before she could respond, the old woman blew out the candles. Darkness swallowed her. The pitch-black darkness made Evelyn stumble into the chapel pews. The sound of light footsteps echoed around her, circling, as if more people were there. A collective whisper repeated the same mantra. "They return. They return ... The cold penetrated Evelyn's bones. Groping, she found a side door and escaped into the rain, panting. Looking back, she noticed the candles were lit again, alone. But the chapel seemed completely empty. Back on the streets, Evelyn felt the entire city was against her. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn. There was no movement. Only thick fog and wind. When she reached the inn, she noticed something terrible. The door to her room was open. On the floor, her clothes were scattered and her suitcase was overturned. On the mirror, someone had drawn the same symbol as the chapel, with something red, viscous, that looked like fresh blood. Evelyn backed away, but heard footsteps behind her in the hallway. A tall man dressed in black was walking toward her. His face was covered by an ancient mask, made of cracked wood, engraved with the same circle. Evelyn ran to the bedroom, slammed the door, and pushed a dresser against it. The sound of footsteps grew closer, then stopped. Absolute silence. When she finally summoned the courage to peek through the crack, the hallway was empty. Inside the room, Evelyn opened the briefcase again. Among the papers was a leather-bound diary. The first pages spoke of a secret cult in Whitmore known as the Sea Watchers. According to the diary, they believed something dormant in the deep waters would awaken on stormy nights, demanding human sacrifices. Evelyn trembled when she read that the chosen ones are always newcomers, for the town never offers its own. A clap of thunder shook the windows. Evelyn quickly closed her diary, but a new page fell out. It was a handwritten letter. "Don't trust the man at the lighthouse. He belongs to them." Shock coursed through her. The man who had given her the briefcase had seemed to be helping her, but now everything was a blur. Who, after all, was telling the truth? And how had everyone known about her arrival before she even set foot in Whitmore? In the early hours of the morning, loud knocks echoed at the door. Evelyn held her breath, but the voice outside made her freeze. "Open up, Evelyn. I know you're awake." It was the man from the lighthouse. They already know you have the briefcase. There's no more time. Evelyn stood still, not responding. After a few seconds, she heard his footsteps retreat. But something unsettling lingered in the air. He hadn't tried to force his way in. It was as if he simply wanted her to know he was there. Dawn brought an eerie silence. The storm had subsided, but the fog still shrouded everything. Evelyn decided to go out and search for answers. He walked to the small square in the center of Whitmore. There was a stone statue of a fisherman with nets, but the nets didn't hold fish. They held entangled human bodies. The inscription at the base read, "The city prospers, the sea charges." Evelyn's stomach churned. This wasn't just superstition. It was part of the town's identity. As she examined the statue, a group of children ran past, singing an old English song. "One for the sea, two for the land. 3 will vanish by the hand." Evelyn tried to follow them, but they disappeared down a narrow alley. Entering, she found only rag dolls lined up on the ground, all with their eyes gouged out. The wind blew, bringing with it the distant ringing of the chapel bell again, the same sound that preceded the disappearances. Frightened, Evelyn returned to the square. This time, people were watching. Residents stood motionless, silent, scattered around windows and street corners. No smiles, no expressions. Just stares fixed on her. It was as if the entire town had decided to reveal itself. The silence was broken when everyone at once began to whisper, "The Chosen One has arrived. The Chosen One has arrived." Evelyn recoiled in panic. The town knew exactly who she was and why she was there. Evelyn ran into the narrow streets, trying to escape the suffocating hazes. The voices echoed behind her like a wave of murmurs, repeating her name. She turned corners, passed through alleys, but the feeling was the same. There was no real way out of Whitmore. When she finally stopped to breathe, she realized she was in front of the local cemetery. The iron gates were open, creaking in the wind. Curiously, all the graves were recent. Not a single headstone was dated more than 20 years ago. As she walked among the graves, Evelyn noticed something even more disturbing. Nearly every name had been scratched out or erased. Only the initials remained. In the center of the cemetery stood a stone mausoleum with a circular symbol engraved on its door. A muffled sound came from within, like desperate pounding. Evelyn recoiled, her heart racing. Someone or something was trapped inside. Before she could decide what to do, a hand grabbed her shoulder. It was the man from the lighthouse. "I told you to trust me," he whispered breathlessly. "They've already begun the ritual." Evelyn tried to pull away, but he stared at her intently. "If we don't escape now, you'll be the next offering." She hesitated, remembering the letter accusing him of treason. But at that moment, any option seemed better than being alone before the pulsating mausoleum. The man led her through a hidden tunnel behind the cemetery. The path was narrow, covered in roots and damp stones. The torches he carried illuminated ancient inscriptions on the walls, human figures kneeling before something colossal rising from the waves. "The Watchers have always kept their pact," he said. "The city prospers as long as the sea receives its due." Evelyn felt the cold ground beneath her feet. "And why me?" He answered simply, "Because you came." The tunnel opened into a cave that led directly to the raging sea. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was deafening. On a stone altar were fresh marks of blood and cut ropes. "This is where the last ones were sacrificed," the man explained. Evelyn recoiled, sickened. "So you led me straight into the trap?" she shouted. He threw up his hands. "No, I'm trying to break the cycle. But without you, it's impossible." Before Evelyn could question him, the water before them began to bubble. An abnormal current stirred the sea, as if something gigantic were moving in the depths. The man pulled Evelyn back. "It's too late." Foam rose, and a deep sound, almost like a roar, echoed from the water. Evelyn couldn't see clearly, only the colossal shadow moving beneath the surface. Fear gripped every part of her body. They fled down the hillside path, but the town already seemed prepared. When they reached the streets again, dozens of residents waited silently, forming a circle around them. All carried lanterns, and their faces were covered by wooden masks bearing the circle symbol. Evelyn felt the briefcase grow heavy in her hands. The man murmured, "They don't want you. They want what's inside." The masked leaders stepped forward. Evelyn hurriedly opened the briefcase. Inside, besides the newspapers and the diary, was an object she hadn't noticed before. A small iron box, locked with an old-fashioned padlock. The man paled. "So it's true. You brought the key." Evelyn didn't understand. Key for what? Before she could firmly grasp the box, one of the masked men snatched it from her hands. The crowd erupted in a deep celebratory chant. The residents carried the box to the square, placing it in front of the fisherman's statue. Everyone began chanting in a language Evelyn didn't recognize. The man pulled it back. "If they open it, there will be no going back." The box was placed on the pedestal, and slowly the padlock began to move on its own, as if obeying the collective voice. The final click echoed through the air. Silence fell over everyone. Evelyn realized no one was breathing. The box's lid opened. A bluish glow escaped from within, illuminating the masked faces. Evelyn saw symbols moving, as if the light were liquid and alive. Suddenly, a wave of icy air swept through the city, causing all the doors and windows to slam shut at once. The sea roared even louder, and the chapel bell rang of its own accord. Something had been unleashed. Evelyn couldn't tell if it was a spirit, a curse, or something far worse. The glow from the box spread like smoke, snaking through the streets of Whitmore. Residents fell to their knees, chanting in a trance. Evelyn, however, felt something different. The light seemed drawn to her, enveloping her skin with a piercing cold sensation. The man with the lighthouse tried to push her away. "This is what they brought you here for. You are the vessel." Evelyn screamed, but her voice was lost in the chorus. Suddenly, the wooden masks began to crack on the residents' faces. Behind them, there was no skin-only faces covered in markings identical to the circle symbol. Their eyes, completely black, reflected the bluish light. Evelyn felt the urge to flee, but her feet were glued to the ground. The energy from the box seemed to feed on her, draining her strength. The man shook her. "Fight this, or they'll have you forever." With extreme effort, Evelyn managed to free herself and ran across the square. But the city seemed to distort around her, the streets multiplying like a maze. Every alley led to the same place, the square and the fisherman's statue. It was as if Whitmore were alive, determined not to let her escape. The glow of the box pulsed in the center, growing more intense by the second, and the air already smelled of rotten sea air. The lighthouse man reached her. "There's only one way. The box needs to be returned to the sea." Evelyn shook her head in shock. What if that's exactly what they want? He hesitated, but didn't answer. Suddenly, the fisherman's statue began to move. The stone nets parted, revealing real claws beneath. The creature wasn't just a sculpture, it was a guardian finally awakening. The ground shook as the guardian statue rose, dragging the nets like chains. The villagers cheered in unison, exalted. Evelyn and the man fled amidst screams, but the creature followed with heavy footsteps. The sound of the chains clanging against the ground was deafening. Each beat made Evelyn's heart race, as if each second were her last. The guardian seemed not just to pursue, but to guide, forcing them toward the sea. Reaching the edge of the cliff, the raging sea awaited them like a hungry mouth. The creature approached, lifting its nets, glowing with the same light as the box. The man gripped Evelyn's arm tightly. "It's now or never. Throw her." Evelyn stared at the box in his hands. remembering the warning in the diary. Returning it to the sea doesn't end the cycle, it just starts it again. The dilemma was terrible. Destroy or give in to the sea? The roar of the sea mingled with the chorus of the city behind them. Evelyn closed her eyes and picked up the box. She felt the iron vibrate, as if it were a heartbeat. Then, without thinking, she ran to the edge and hurled it with all her might against the rocks. The impact shattered the box into pieces. The glow exploded in a blue flash that swept over the entire city. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute, almost deafening. When the light faded, the villagers fell to the ground inert. The wooden masks crumbled to dust. The guardian petrified again, turning into a statue. Evelyn breathed heavily, believing it was over. But the sea remained rough, and an even larger shadow moved beneath the waters. The man stared at her in horror. You didn't destroy ... you just freed. Evelyn felt the chill of revelation. The true evil was never in the box. The sea parted as if something immense had emerged from within. Colossal waves rose, sending salt spray across the cliffside. A colossal figure, with glowing eyes and enormous tentacles, began to emerge from the depths. The chapel bells rang frantically, as if announcing the arrival of the inevitable. Evelyn fell to her knees, paralyzed. The prophecy of the cuttings, the sacrifices, the cult, everything pointed to this moment. The lighthouse man pulled her violently. We can still escape. Come. But Evelyn couldn't move. The creature's giant eyes stared directly at her, as if recognizing something essential in her. The sea roared. The entire city seemed to tremble. The deep voice echoed inside Evelyn's mind, not in her ears. You came. Finally, you came. She realized, in despair, that she had never been chosen by chance. The entire city existed solely to lure her there. A voice inside Evelyn's mind boomed like thunder. They weren't ordinary words, but commands that pierced her will. The man in the lighthouse shouted beside her, trying to drag her away, but he seemed insignificant compared to the power emanating from the sea. The colossal creature rose higher and higher, salty drops falling like heavy rain. Evelyn realized she was somehow connected to it. The entity's gaze never wavered from her for even an instant. Suddenly, the townspeople began to rise. No longer human, but servants of the creature. Their eyes glowed blue, and their bodies moved in perfect synchrony, like puppets. Evelyn recoiled, her heart racing. The man from the lighthouse pulled out a rusty knife and whispered, "If you are the vessel, I must stop you before it is too late." The insane gleam in his eyes showed that even he no longer knew whether he was on her side or the sea's. Evelyn grabbed a rock and struck him in the hand, knocking the knife out. "If I die now, we all die together," he shouted. The man recoiled in confusion as the villagers' chanting intensified. The sky darkened suddenly, as if night had fallen in seconds. The creature raised a tentacle, slamming it into the water. The impact shook the hillside, and the ground split open in deep cracks. Evelyn ran toward the chapel, the only structure that seemed to resist the chaos. Inside, candles burned alone, and the altar bore the symbol of the circle, now pulsing blue. As she approached, the light from the symbol penetrated her hands. Images flooded her mind. Generations of sacrifices, the town founded as an offering, and an ancient pact sealed in blood. She understood, horrified, that Whitmore had never been an ordinary town. It was a portal. The vision revealed even more. Evelyn was no accident. Her blood carried the lineage of the one who had first sealed the pact. She was a direct descendant of the founders of Whitmore. "That's why they called me," he murmured, feeling the ground shake. The creature roared in the distance, and the chapel seemed to vibrate in response. The entire city was a prison built to contain it, and now, with his arrival, the prison was crumbling. The man from the lighthouse appeared at the chapel door, bloodied and with desperate eyes. "Now you understand." Either you seal the pact again, or we all perish. Evelyn breathed heavily. And to seal it, a sacrifice is necessary, isn't it? He nodded. A bloodline. Yours. Dread gripped her. This was what everyone had expected from the beginning. The reason the letter had drawn her here wasn't to save anyone, but to condemn her. The creature's roar shattered the chapel's stained glass windows. Evelyn fell to her knees, surrounded by colorful shards. The voices of the villagers echoed, growing louder. She lifted the diary from its folder, flipping through it desperately until she found the last page. The cycle only ends when the offering is refused. When the chosen one does not yield, the sea feeds on everyone. Evelyn understood the dilemma: sacrifice herself alone or condemn all of Whitmore. Tears streamed down her face. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered. The lighthouse man knelt, trembling. "Choose, Evelyn. Choose now." But before she could decide, the creature's voice invaded her mind again. "Don't fight. You are part of me. The pact is not a prison. It is an inheritance." The words burned like fire in her mind, making her feel that her existence had always been connected to the sea. Standing, Evelyn raised her hands above the altar. The circle symbol glowed brightly, responding to her presence. The chapel floor opened up, revealing a chasm of raging water. The energy pulled everything toward the hole: pews, candles, even the lighthouse man himself, who clung to a pillar. "Do something," he shouted. Evelyn closed her eyes, trying to decide. She could surrender, sealing the pact ... or refuse, letting the sea consume them all. The next instant, Evelyn opened her eyes. The blue glow flooded her skin. She took a step forward toward the abyss. "If it's going to end, let it end with me." The man from the lighthouse screamed desperately, but he no longer had the strength to stop it. Evelyn threw herself into the void, and the water swallowed her. The symbol disappeared, the ground closed in, and the chapel plunged into silence. Outside, the sea calmed, and the residents fell unconscious. For a moment, it seemed like everything was over. The surface of the sea became smooth as glass. No waves, no sound. The silence was so absolute it seemed supernatural. The man from the lighthouse fell to his knees on the beach, staring at the water. "She made the sacrifice," he murmured. The residents, now without their masks, slowly woke up, confused, with no memory of what had happened. For them, it was as if they had awakened from a collective nightmare. Only he knew the price paid. But something wasn't right. The lighthouse blinked 3 times, strangely, like a signal. The man raised his head and noticed a shadow in the sea, motionless, as if watching the shore. Suddenly, a gentle wave washed something onto the sand. It was the leather briefcase Evelyn was carrying. He ran to pick it up, but hesitated. It was dry, as if it had never touched water. When he opened it, he found only a blank page, which slowly began to write itself. The words appeared in blue ink. "The cycle doesn't end. It just changes the bearer." The man recoiled, terrified. The breeze carried a soft, unmistakable laugh. He looked around, but there was no one. The laughter seemed to come from within him, echoing in his mind. The waves receded further, revealing for an instant a figure on the seabed. Not the colossal creature, but Evelyn, her eyes glowing blue, watching him. Days passed, and Whitmore returned to his somber routine. Tourists who arrived noticed nothing unusual, just an isolated and eerily silent village. The man at the lighthouse, however, saw signs everywhere. Shadows moved on their own. The chapel bell rang on windless nights, and voices murmured whenever he closed his eyes. Most frightening was the feeling of being constantly watched by someone very close. On a moonless night, he climbed to the top of the lighthouse. The sea was calm, but a blue glow spread across the horizon. As he turned on the flashlight, he caught a glimpse of a woman's reflection in the water, Evelyn. But she wasn't the same. Her face was serene, and her eyes held the same hue as the deep sea. "You didn't save me?" Her voice echoed on the wind. "I became what I was always meant to be." The lighthouse shuddered, as if responding to her presence. The man fell to his knees, covering his ears, but Evelyn's voice continued to echo within his mind. "The sea will always charge. Now I am the charge." Below, the village houses began to turn on their lights one by one, as if obeying an invisible command. The residents poured into the streets in silence, all staring at the lighthouse. The cycle wasn't over. It had simply changed form. He ran down, desperate. The entire town was on its feet, gathered in the square before the fisherman's statue. But something was different. The faces no longer showed fear, but devotion. On the pedestal, a new inscription glowed blue. "Evelyn Clarke, Guardian of the Sea." He fell to his knees in disbelief. The sacrifice hadn't destroyed her. It had merely transformed her into the successor to the pact. She was now the entity guiding Whitmore. That morning, the chapel bells rang on their own. The residents lined up in rows, carrying offerings of fish, salt, and animal blood. The man watched in horror, but no one seemed to question anything. It was as if everyone had naturally accepted the new order. Above them, a blue mist covered the sky. Within it, Evelyn watched, ethereal, like a shadow cast across the sky. Her voice sounded like the sea wind itself. "The sea no longer needs to wait for generations. I am here. Always." The city responded in unison, repeating each word like a chorus. The lighthouse man tried to flee, but every street led back to the square. He realized that Whitmore had never had a real exit. It was a labyrinth created to imprison all who entered. The fate was not just his, but anyone who dared enter. The city was not a place. It was a ritual. The next day, tourists arrived by boat. The man tried to warn them, but his voice faltered. When they stepped onto the pier, Evelyn was already there, in human form, smiling serenely. The locals welcomed them with hospitality, as always. The cycle began anew, no longer dependent on storms or forced sacrifices. Now, Evelyn was the one who chose. She, the guardian. She, the curse. The town would prosper as long as she decided who would stay, and who the sea would take. The following night, the man was summoned to the chapel. The villagers surrounded him silently and pushed him toward the altar. Evelyn appeared before him, floating in the blue light. "You fought against fate," she said softly, "and for that, you will be my first tribute." Desperation gripped him. He screamed, but no one reacted. Evelyn raised her hand, and the waters of the abyss within the chapel parted again, hungry. Dragged by an invisible force, he fell into the void, swallowed by the dark waters. Silence returned to the chapel. Evelyn looked at the residents and smiled. The cycle has been restored. Everyone knelt before her, revering the new sovereignty. The leather briefcase, which once held secrets, now burned in blue flames on the altar, consumed as if it had never existed. As the weeks passed, Whitmore flourished. Fishing became abundant, ships arrived laden with riches, and the residents lived in tranquility. But with each full moon, someone disappeared. Always a visitor, always an outsider, and no one ever dared question it. The town had made its choice. Evelyn, the eternal guardian, maintained the balance between prosperity and sacrifice. Rumors began to spread. Travelers spoke of a village in northern Scotland where everything seemed too perfect. Some disappeared, others never returned. But to those who remained, Whitmore seemed like a hidden paradise, a blessed land. None of them knew they were walking straight into the heart of a trap laid centuries ago, now stronger than ever. One night, a new visitor arrived alone by train, just as Evelyn had done. He carried a mysterious envelope. The note read, "The answers you seek are in Whitmore. But be careful. Trust no one." He looked around, confused, as the fog closed in over the tracks. The city seemed to wait for him, silent, with invisible eyes. The cycle repeated itself. From the top of the hill, Evelyn watched the newcomer. Her blue eyes shone in the darkness, reflecting the roaring sea in the distance. She smiled, a cold, eternal smile. "Welcome to Whitmore," she muttered to herself. The entire city seemed to breathe along with her. The stranger's fate was already sealed, as it had always been for all who dared cross its borders. The pact remained. The sea would always claim. And now, Evelyn was the sea itself.